I want to talk today about two concepts that will be familiar to you, crime and criminals. And I want to argue that they're not the same thing, but we often confuse the two, but it's very important to know the distinction between them. So let me start with some definitions of criminology just to emphasise the point. So if we go to the etymology of criminology, we find that crimen equals crime, and logos equals science, so the science of crime. If we look at the OED, that's the Oxford English Dictionary, we find criminology is defined as, let me just see, there we go, study of crime and criminals. If we look at the American Society of Criminology, they talk about members who pursue a scholarly, scientific and professional knowledge concerning the measurement, etiology, consequences, prevention, control and treatment of crime and delinquency. And if you look at the journal Criminology, it's devoted to crime and deviant behaviour. So the term crime comes up all of the time. We have more technical problems. There we go. So, let me briefly read this. This is from Frank Cullen, who gave the 2010 Sutherland Address at the American Society of Criminology. In other words, he was the Criminologist of the Year, the Oscar for criminologists. He said, for over half a century, criminology has been dominated by a paradigm of adolescent limited criminology, ALC, that has privileged the use of self-report surveys of adolescents to test sociological theories of criminal behaviour, and has embraced the view that nothing works to control crime. Although ALC has created knowledge, opposed injustice and advanced scholars' careers, it has outlived its utility. The time has come for criminologists to choose a different future. Thus, a new paradigm is needed that is rooted in life course criminology, brings criminologists closer to offenders and to the crime event, prioritises the organisation of knowledge and produces scientific knowledge that's capable of improving the offenders' lives and reducing crime. And later in his talk he said, most criminologists know a lot about criminality or propensity and almost nothing about crime or crime events. This is going to just keep... So, here's what I want to argue this morning. Most criminologists say they're interested in crime, but they're not really interested in crime. Overwhelming bulk of criminological research is focused on the concept of criminality. Most criminologists are interested in why people become bad. They're not interested in the phenomenon of crime. And I think that if we pay more attention to crime, we can improve our understanding of criminality. We can expand our capacity to prevent crime, to actually do something that is useful. It can prepare us for the changing face of crime. Crime is not the same today as it was when many of these theories were devised 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And it can provide a basis for true multidisciplinarity. And what I want to do in this talk is go through these points. The other point I'd make, and we were talking about this at dinner last night, it is really interesting. In my institute, we get people who watch CSI and Profiler, and they all come, they want to learn how to profile serial offenders. This is much, much more interesting than that. Some of these crime patterns that we're going to look at today, I think are really fascinating, and I hope that you can be as excited by them as I am. Okay, this is what I want to cover. I want to look at this difference between crime and criminality. I want to look at the issue of preventing crime. I want to look at how crime is changing, and I want to look at how we can really take multidisciplinarity seriously. In other words, how we can bring disciplines that you may never have thought of before into this fight against crime. And then I'll look at this, the numbers of, never mind. All right, let's look at this distinction first between crime and criminality. As I said, Most psychological and criminological theories of crime are in fact theories of criminality. So my background is a psychologist. I spent the first 10 years of my life working as a clinical psychologist in a prison system. And most of my interest was with the offender and why the offender had become the way they had. But criminality is a propensity. It's a quality of a person. Crime is an actual event or a behaviour, something that happens in time and space. Different things. Not all crime is caused by criminals. So a lot of crime, we'll discover, is actually caused by people who you wouldn't ordinarily think of as having a criminal disposition. So why does that happen? How can people who aren't criminals commit crime? The other interesting point is that even people who we think are serious criminals, they don't commit crime all of the time. They might only commit crime for 30 minutes a day. Or they might not commit crime for 6 months and then commit bursts of crime. So criminals don't always commit crime. So just looking at this phenomenon of criminality doesn't help us explain the phenomenon of crime very much, or not. It doesn't help us explain it completely. I have a little window that keeps popping up here, but I can keep closing it. That's fair. So offenders are just one element of a crime. And here's a very famous diagram that if you don't know now, I'm sure by the end of your course you'll come across. It's called the crime triangle. And basically it says, for any crime to occur, you need three things. You need an offender, but you also need a target and a victim, and you also need a location in which that crime occurs. As criminologists, we spend 99.9% of our time examining this phenomenon. We spend almost no time examining these two phenomena. But crime can't occur without these two. And so my argument is, let's still look at the offender, but let's spend more time looking at these two aspects of crime, because crime cannot occur without them. So, what I want to argue is that all behaviour occurs in an ecological context. We tend to think of ourselves as having our personality and our attitudes and who we are, and we tend to think of that being what causes all our behaviour. People are aggressive because they have an aggressive personality. People are happy because they have a happy personality. And so almost all of our explanations of behaviour are focused on the characteristics of an individual. But in fact, all behaviour is a result of a person-situation interaction. In other words, it's the characteristics of a person and the context they're in at any given time. And all of us change. We're not happy all the time. We're not confident all the time. How we behave in any one circumstance depends on who we are and where we are. So your behaviour here, very quiet and attentive, is very different from when you're at the hotel pub, okay, where you're not quiet and attentive. Who you are, the way you behave, changes. And one of the things we know from a lot of research now is that good people can do bad things, and even bad people aren't bad all the time. In psychology, are there psychologists here, people with a psychology background? Okay. So, you may have heard of this debate, the cross-situational consistency debate, and that's the debate I just talked about. That it's not enough just to try to understand behaviour in terms of the kind of persons involved. You've got to understand the context, the situation they're involved. It's very interesting. We are very able to do this with our own behaviour. For example, if we get angry at someone, it's because they were stupid, we have had a very bad day, we are very stressed, and so forth. If someone else gets angry, it's because they're an aggressive person, they're bad, and so forth. When we think about our own behaviour, we understand very clearly that context is crucial. When we look at other people's behaviour, we discount all that and just say they're bad. This is what happens with offenders. We tend to think of crime simply as the product of bad people without considering the victim, the target, and the location. Okay. And I won't go into this, but again, if you've done psychology, you'll know that this is called the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to not think about context, the tendency to think only in terms of people's dispositions. Oh, this, hang on, look over. It's okay, it's no problem. Well, what are the implications for crime? Why is this important to us? I think it's crucial. I think we need to understand a few things. The potential to commit crime is widely distributed in the community. It's not just criminals and us. You can't divide the world into two groups of people. All of us in this room have the potential to commit crime, and in fact, all of us in this room have committed crimes, I'm sure. Okay? I have. Little ones, they're just little ones, but we all committed crimes. Now, we don't commit as many crimes as a serial murderer, but nevertheless. A great deal of crime is opportunistic. Many offenders don't get up in the morning thinking, I'm going to commit a crime today. It happens as the day progresses, as events unfold. It happens when they're opportunistic, when an opportunity arises. So many burglars, if you talk to burglars, they'll say, I was drinking at the pub and I met a friend I hadn't seen for many years from prison, and we got talking and we walked home and we saw a house and the window was open and we looked at each other and we thought, why not? That's a kind of a typical kind of burglary, more so than looking carefully over a plan over the kitchen table and working out how to do it. But, so here's the thing, if that's the case, then even, crime is opportunistic, even planned crime is governed by situational factors. Even if you are carefully planning to commit a crime, the thing you do is you plan it around the situation. So you don't burgle every house that you see, you carefully select a house that is going to offer you lots of things to steal, and the risks of getting caught are very low. So, this, if you want to just take one thing home from today, underline one thing, crime is not random. This is the most important message. We often don't think about this, but crime is very patterned. It's patterned by these situations, opportunities and other situational factors. So we talk about this in time and space. Crime has really interesting patterns in time and space as it follows opportunities. Crime follows opportunities. And one of the very useful outcomes of this, one of the things that we've been able to use to our advantage, is that we can fight crime not just by changing people, which is what we do most of the time. We spend, when I was a prison psychologist, I spent all of my time trying to change offenders. We can efficiently change crime by changing environments, by changing the locations in which crime is likely to occur, where crime is not random. And this offers us some very powerful tools and techniques for fighting crime that really have been ignored for a long time. Am I speaking too slowly or fastly, or it's okay? Okay, thank you. I'll be very brief on this slide. This does relate to some traditional criminological theories, and one of the ones that it relates to is something called control theory. Again, if you're doing criminology or psychology, you may have heard of this. It's by Gottfredson and Hershey. And I think control theory is one way to understand situational factors. Control theory says we spend a lot of time trying to work out why people become bad. But that's wrong. What we need to understand is why do people become good? So according to control, so most theories say children are born innocent, and as they develop, they learn to do bad things. They learn to become evil and learn to become criminals. Gottfredson and Hershey said the opposite. They said everybody's born selfish and interested only in themselves. And what you learn as you grow older is to not to be selfish. You learn to become socialised. You learn to inhibit your urges. So if you think about a young baby, a baby's sole interest is themselves. They want to be fed and changed and comforted. Their whole world revolves around receiving their needs. And as they grow older, they have to learn to temper those needs. If you imagine bringing up a child and not providing any boundaries or any discipline, as they grew up, they would become psychopathic. They would become totally self-absorbed, totally selfish. So Gottfredson and Hershey says that crime is not about people learning to become bad, it's about them not learning to inhibit their impulses. And one of those impulses, one of those things that control our impulses are situational factors. So we can think, I think this helps explain why the potential to commit crime exists in all of us. When we think that no one's watching us, that's when we're likely to be at our worst. If we're at the supply cupboard, you know, the store with the pencils and the things, and we think no one's there, we might put a few more in our pocket because no one's watching. And I think this can be explained, if you want to, you know, by this control theory. Okay, so I want to just focus on so I said I think the potential for crime is widely distributed. There was a book, came out quite a few years ago, 1994, called Everybody Does It. And it basically showed that crime is widely distributed, that a lot of people will commit crime. And this is a survey of self-reported prevalence rates for offending by 14 to 20-year-olds in England, Wales, Spain there, Netherlands, Portugal, Switzerland, and so forth. So they were asked, have you ever committed some crimes? And have you ever done so in the last month? There's Spain. I think what this shows more than anything is that the English lie. I don't necessarily believe those figures. These seem more reasonable. But anyway, very high levels. Most people will say they've committed some crimes. It's no problem at all. I just need to not wander so far. Have you come across this graph here? It's called the age crime curve. Very important finding in criminology. What we find if we look at the performance of crime by the age of the offender, in almost every society we get this really pronounced curve. So this is the age along here, and this is crime rate. Crime peaks around 17 or 18 years old. This, by the way, is mainly boys. Girls, if you were to have one for girls, it would go like this, boink, and then like that. So boys, and particularly 17, 18-year-old boys, are very... Girls, you all knew that, okay? They're very silly. So most crime is actually committed by 17, 18-year-old boys, and the vast majority of those, the good news, the vast majority of those boys stop committing crime and lead ordinary lives. So there's something about being 17 and 18-year-old and male that causes people to do lots of stupid things. And I speak from experience because I was once 17 and 18 and I look back at those years and you? Yeah. See, your professor is also, he admits it. And there was a study done in the UK that showed 80% of adolescent boys, 18-year-old boys, had some formal contact with the criminal justice system. 80% had some formal contact. In other words, committing crime as a youth is normal. Not committing crime as a youth is abnormal. And these are just some other figures. I'm going to speed through some of these. This simply says that by their 40th birthday, 1/3 of UK males have a court conviction. Not just talk to the police, they've actually got a conviction from a court. 30% of males in the UK. So it's very widespread. There's a term here, again, I'm going to keep talking about this to the psychologists, I'm afraid. Have you heard of the Lucifer effect? Okay, so it was invented by a fellow named Philip Zimbardo. And the Lucifer effect is a biblical reference. It refers to the fallen angel. So God's favourite angel went from being the favourite angel to being the devil. So Zimbardo was interested in how do good people do bad things? How do good people become bad? I want to look at two famous psychological experiments that you may have heard of. So again, I won't spend a lot of time. Milgram's obedience to authority study, okay, and Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. Has anyone not heard of those? I'll judge. Should I go through it very quickly? Okay. And I want to look at some real life examples. So this is Milgram's obedience to authority experiment. This is Milgram here. And this is the subject of the experiment. And this is a Confederate. This is a friend of Milgram's, but he doesn't know. So Milgram tells this fellow here to scream in agony whenever this fellow gives him an electric shock. But of course, this wire actually isn't connected at all. So Milgram tells him that we're doing a learning experiment. And every time he gets it wrong, you give him an electric shock. But it's not really an electric shock. Okay, so what happened? There was a dial on this machine here. I don't think I've got it here. No, I don't have it. A dial on the machine that actually went up to fatal. Fatal. Two-thirds, 66% of people delivered the fatal shock. Can you believe that? Because they were told to do it. These are just normal university students like you. And I always ask, if you were a student, would you have done it? And everybody says no. But 2/3 of Milgram's students said yes. And this is the famous Stanford prison experiment. And again, you mostly know this. He set up a phony prison in the basement of Stanford University, randomly assigned students to being guards and prisoners. And within a couple of days, 5 days, I think he had to abandon the experiment because the guards had become so brutal and the prisoners had become so distressed that it was against the psychological interest to continue. And I just want to say, so more recently, Zimbardo has used these studies to talk about why the Abu Ghraib situation occurred. You all recall that in Iraq. The Americans took over a prison there and they put alleged terrorists in, and pretty soon these extraordinary film pictures took place of the abuse the guards were inflicting on the prisoners. Now, how do we explain this? Do we think that for some reason this prison just happened to get a concentration of psychopathic guards, or was there something about the nature of that prison environment that allowed ordinary soldiers to do evil things? And I just include this because I think I say here, life imitates research. This is from the Stanford prison experiment, and this is a picture I got from the net of the detention of an Iraqi suspect. And, you know, they're just so similar. Okay. All right. So, un momento. One of the things I said, the consequence of all of this, the effect of all this, is that crime isn't random. If crime is being influenced by the kinds of situations that occur, then we should get more crime in situations that promote crime than in situations that don't. In other words, crime will not be random. Crime will be distributed in time and space according to opportunity. And I want to prove that to you by showing you some, I think, really neat research that people in our department have done. So let me quickly go through this. Crime is patterned in time and space. This is, again, the basic message for today. The daily movements of offenders and victims follow predictable routines and patterns. And we've done a lot of research about how this kind of thing. Crime clusters in hot spots and at hot times. And these hot spots and hot times indicate criminogenic situations. And here's a quote from a leading person in our field, Larry Sherman. And this is for all of the CSI people, all of the profilers here. It's 6 times more predictable by the address of the occurrence than by the identity of the offender. Future crime is 6 times more predictable by the address of the occurrence than by the identity of the offender. Why aren't we talking more about where done it rather than who done it? In other words, we can say with a lot more confidence where and when a crime is going to occur than who committed it. We could tell you in London, for example, which are the most dangerous nightclubs and pubs, and that there's probably going to be a fight there tonight. But we can't tell you who is committing that fight. Okay. So let me just show you this. This is a simple hotspot map. You've probably all seen something like this. But what we end up with here, this tiny little place in this particular borough of London. So 18% of all robberies in this whole area occur in this tiny 1% of the area. So that's basically what a hotspot is, where there's a higher incidence than you would expect of a particular behaviour. And there it is there. I want to go through a couple of crime patterns just to show none of this is unusual. If you think about it, all of these patterns are perfectly understandable. The problem is most people don't think about them. But when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. So, for example, this is damage to vehicles by day of the week. So people go and just smash windscreens or bend aerials. And not surprisingly, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, most occur on Saturday. And if you wanted to go further, what time Saturday do you think? When do you think is most likely on Saturday? 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, maybe? Yeah. After, yeah. Okay. So.
Sunday is still 11.
Yeah. So maybe 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, 2 in the morning. So again, this is not earth-shattering. It's probably obvious, but it's also very useful. If you're a police officer and you want to know how to deploy your resources, funnily enough, certainly in Australia, we had the exact opposite. For reasons I've never understood, most police officers work from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, the exact same time that fewest crimes occur. This is robbery, so street robbery by time of the day. And again, we get a very predictable but understandable pattern. This is midnight. This is midnight. So what happens here? Well, people are coming out of the pub and they're causing a bit of trouble, but they're getting tired, so they go home and they go to bed. Not only the offender goes to bed, by the way, who else goes to bed? The potential victim. You can't rob somebody on the street if there's no one on the street. Again, obvious, but... And then they start to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning and commit a few robberies, and it all peaks around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then it slows down, and around about 8 o'clock, remembering this is London and not Spain, why does it slow down at 8 o'clock, do you think? Dinner. People eating dinner. Offenders and victims eat dinner. Yeah. And then they stop eating dinner and it goes up again. Okay? So again, very explainable, but if you don't think about it, you would think that robbery might occur anytime. This is an interesting one because it looks at time of the day, but it does it by weekday and weekend day. So this is robbery again for young people, 16, in other words, school students, and it compares weekdays with weekends. So this is time of the day. This is about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, what happens on weekdays at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon? After school. Everyone rushes out of school, and that's when you get this increase in robbery. On the weekends? Well, no, because there's no school. Again, very simple. I'm not saying this is, miraculous. I'm just saying it's really interesting patterns that we should be aware of. This one's interesting. I want you to look at here. This is a clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. This is a borough, and these are hotspots that occur. So it's 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, not much happening, not much. 10 o'clock, we start to get this hotspot. 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and so forth. 3, 4. What's going to happen at 8 o'clock, do you think? There it goes. Boink, 8 o'clock. And then they come out from dinner, and if we go down and look at this, we find this is the city centre, and this is the railway station. Okay, city centre, and then I think the 8 o'clock one is really fascinating because there 6, 7, 8. There it goes again. You see, and then people are starting to go home. Okay. This one's just on a slightly larger scale. I hope this works. Let me see. Let me see, how do I do this? There we go. Okay, so this is maritime piracy over years. And these are hotspots for maritime piracy. So 1994, and I used to live in Australia, and this used to be the hotspot for, this is called the Straits of Malacca. And there were lots of Thai and Indonesian pirates around there. But do you remember what happened around 2003? And so that's the Straits of Malacca there. And then we started getting Somali pirates by 2007, and then they just went nuts. Okay? So, a really neat way of mapping maritime privacy. So this was done by a colleague of mine, Shane Johnson. This is a nice piece of work done by a colleague, mainly Aidan Sidebottom. One of the big problems in the UK is metal theft. I don't know, there's a problem in Spain? Metal. So 2 kinds of metal, lead and copper. Yeah. So lead...
Specifically in Alicante and in the south of Spain.
Okay. So lead they steal from church roofs, and copper they steal from train tracks in UK. From... Yeah, okay. So copper theft has become a really big problem. So this colleague of mine looked at copper thefts. First of all, you can't see that too well. He looked at the price of copper on the metal exchange. These are years, that's April 2004. And we see copper price escalated rapidly in 2006. He then looked at copper thefts. And what did he discover? What did he discover? Here we go. Here we go. So this is mapping copper thefts. This almost looks like it's been made up, but it hasn't. Okay. So copper thefts almost exactly mirror the price of copper, but there's a lag because it takes a while for the offenders to understand that the price has gone up. So again, the crime is not just random; it's following these price patterns. Okay. I'll just go through a few other little bits and pieces about the kind of research we do in this field and what we know. If we were going to be offenders, if I was going to be a burglar, I would probably want to burgle houses 20 kilometres from where I lived so that people wouldn't find me. Do burglars do that? No. What we find over and over again, that burglars and all offenders offend very close to home. And there's a research field called Journey to Crime Research that looks at how offenders travel from where they live to where they commit crime. And we find a few things, but the most important thing we find is they don't travel very far. They're much more likely to travel. They commit crimes, whether it's burglary or anything else, in areas that they know well. One, because if they know the area well, they know how to escape and they know how to, they know where things are, they're familiar with the scene. The other is they're kind of lazy and they don't want to put a lot of effort into committing crime. They want to commit crime with the least effort possible. So they don't travel very far. We also know, remember that triangle I showed you, with the victims and the offender and the place? This is why it's important. What we find is that this phenomenon of repeat victimisation is very prevalent. If you've been a victim once, you have a much higher probability of being re-victimised or being a victim again. And these are the re-victimisation rates for various crimes. They're very high. People who are sexually abused, 46% of them have a history of being sexually abused. People who are assaulted, 41% have a history. Robbery, 28%, burglary and car theft. In other words, there's also something about victims that contribute, I've got to be careful how I say this, but that plays a role in why a crime occurs. It just so happens some people tend to be victimised over again. A good way of explaining this is with, that's very hard to see, I'll have to draw this, is with burglary figures. This is from Shane Johnson again. You can't see this, but so here's a burgled house. The probability of being burgled again within a week is that. Okay? So if you've got police used to tell burglary victims, don't worry, now you've been burgled, you're safe. It's exactly wrong. If you've been burgled once, you have a high probability of being burgled within another week. And so police can achieve lots of crime reduction by A, targeting places where burglaries recently occurred, and B, telling residents how to protect themselves. Shane Johnson, my colleague, also found that the same thing happened with houses nearby. So this is the probability of a house here, but the next door neighbours have a slightly decreased, so it follows a normal curve. Okay. Let me just have a reality check here, because what I've been talking about all the time here is the importance of the environment and the situation. And what I don't want you to do is to go away thinking that the person isn't important. The whole point about a person-situation interaction is they're both important. Now, it so happens that I think because so much research is being done on offenders, I can afford to spend all of my time thinking about situations. But the reality is, I understand that both are important, and we have to understand how they're both important. So let me just talk about a little piece of research that shows this. This was not done by our colleagues, it was done by some people at Cambridge. It looked at two factors that related to delinquency. It had I think 600 youths, 600 young people were in the study, and they did psychological measures of their levels of impulsivity. And then they divided the youths on whether they lived in a deprived neighbourhood or a privileged neighbourhood. And this is what they found. If you had low impulsivity and lived in a good neighbourhood, you weren't very likely to commit crime. But if you had low impulsivity and lived in a bad neighbourhood, you're only marginally more likely to commit a bit more crime. In other words, impulsivity had an effect, but not a very big effect. By the same token, if you lived in a good neighbourhood and had low impulsivity, you committed this much, and if you lived in a good neighbourhood and had high impulsivity, you only committed a little bit more. In other words, impulsivity and neighbourhoods by themselves only accounted for a little increase in crime. When the two went together, that's when you had high crime rates. So high impulsivity by itself is a little problem. Bad neighbourhoods by themselves are a little problem. Bad neighbourhoods and high impulsivity together are a very big problem. And that's what we mean by an interaction. when two things work together like that. We say in English that the sum is greater than the, what do we say? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Okay, so the whole here is not just high impulsivity plus bad neighbourhood, it's high impulsivity times bad neighbourhood. Now, some guidance here, Fernando. I have too much to do. Can you tell me, how long you like?
We can make a little pause, or we can continue 5 minutes.
Okay.
We can continue 5 minutes. We make a break, and after that we continue.
Okay. I just want to know what to maybe.
For us, you can be all the way here. Yeah.
Well, I think people deserve a break at some point because I know they're going to. It might be a good time to break now because I'm onto a new section. How about that?
So we make a break now.
Yeah.
Hacemos un pequeño descanso de 10-15 minutos y continuamos.
So you only need to put up with 20 more minutes. I've taken far too long to do the first quarter, so I'm going to go over some of the others fairly quickly, but I do want to spend a bit of time on preventing crime because I think this is important. Why are we interested in all of this? We're interested because it shows us new ways of preventing crime, and there are some very good and positive stories about preventing crime using these techniques, as opposed to some of the not so good stories about trying to make people change offenders. So, if crime occurs because of a person and a situation, if we change the situation, we can also change crime, and that's the result here. This is a famous study in our field by Ron Clark, and Ron Clark is a pioneer in situational crime prevention. Let me walk you through this graph. First of all, let me say, in the 1950s, the most common way for British people to commit suicide was gassing themselves in their oven. About 40% of all suicides in Britain occurred when people gassed themselves at home. That was in the 1950s. And then from the late 1950s, Britain gradually changed over from coal gas to natural gas. And it happened slowly. It took about 15 to 20 years for that to occur. And so this gave us the possibility to do a really interesting natural experiment. And that's what this talks about. This line here represents the changeover from coal gas, the amount of carbon monoxide in gas, from 1958 to 1977. This graph here. So it was about 10% of gas was carbon monoxide, way down to zero. This line here represents the total number of suicides in Britain. And we see this decline. And that decline is made up entirely, almost entirely, of the reduction in suicides by gassing. So this is the number of people who committed suicide by putting their head in the oven, by gassing themselves. This is the proportion of gas that was poisonous, and this is the overall suicide rate. What we see is a very important thing. Suicides went down when the most popular opportunity for committing suicide dropped. Now, this is really hard for a lot of people to believe, because you would think, if I want to commit suicide, I'd be so determined that I would keep trying until I found something that worked. But that didn't seem to happen. When the opportunity to use poisonous gas was denied people, almost the majority of those people didn't seek alternative ways. In other words, we got a reduction in suicide rates simply by taking away the opportunity for people to gas themselves. A really important finding, I think. There's some other ones. So this was unintended. No one changed the gas in order to reduce suicides, it just happened. And this is another example. This is the introduction of motorcycle helmets in Germany. So this is the theft of motorcycles, and then they mandated the wearing of helmets. Not because they wanted to reduce motorcycle theft, because they didn't want people to kill themselves. And what happened? We get this plummeting in motorcycle thefts. What happened, do you think? What's the explanation? You can see. Yeah, and people don't want to walk around. Let's look for a bike. Exactly. And this is car thefts. What we notice is there was no displacement. People didn't start stealing more cars.
This is car theft.
The purple one.
Yeah. So there is no displacement.
Yeah. So really interesting. This is the British data. This is theft from motor vehicles. This is people stealing CD players and computers and so forth. This is theft by joyriding. In other words, these are cars that have been stolen and they find them because they've been stolen by young people just for a brief version. And this is theft by professional thieves. They never find the car again. They're in Iraq somewhere or, Egypt or somewhere. Okay, so again, we see these patterns are very highly influenced by environmental factors. When we started to get this is when we started to get really interesting things in our cars. This is when we started to get CD players and the like, and so thefts go up. The story of car thefts is one of the most interesting in environmental criminology. When immobilizers were introduced, this resulted in a sudden decrease in car thefts, not only in the UK, but in every country where immobilizers were introduced. You can look at the car theft patterns for every country and get almost an identical pattern where car thefts are going up, and the minute car immobilizers are introduced in the early 90s.
What is
The electronic systems, so that if you don't use the right key, the car just stops. Yeah. These were introduced at different times in different countries. So in UK in 1 year, Spain somewhere else, Australia another. And if you look at car thefts, in each case, the drop in car thefts occurs directly after the immobilizers. And this has been one of the great reductions right across the Western world. Car thefts have dropped in every country since the 1990s. And a lot of people argue that this is why crime generally has gone down, because car thefts are a gateway crime. They lead into other crimes. Again, I know I don't have a lot of time. This is the story of a project in a local market in the UK. There were lots of thefts from old ladies' bags. This happened to me in Paris, by the way, about 2 weeks ago. Someone walks up very close and puts their hand in, and I lost my wallet. But these ladies were losing the things out of the bags. And these are the market stalls. They solved this problem so simply. They simply widened the stalls. And they reduced thefts by about 75%. And again, they looked in other market towns and there was no increase. A very simple environmental strategy. These are some chairs that were designed, and some strategies in the UK that were designed by our department and a department of design. One of the big problems in the UK is theft from bags in cafes. So we came up with two solutions. One is to put the bag there, and one is to hang it there. Another project that we were involved in at Jill Dando Institute was the design of these bike stands that allow you to... What would happen is people would put their bike on a regular stand and they'd come back and the wheel would be left and the rest of the bike would go, or whatever. This allows you to lock the wheel, the frame and the front wheel. And this reduced bike thefts by 20%, or I forget the exact figure. Another way to do this is to have portable bikes. So my secretary, for example, has one of these and she just puts the bike next to her desk. This doesn't translate into Spanish, I suspect, but this is a pun. Alligating, like alligators, crocodiles. And this is about gating, putting a gate on back alleys. So these are back in London. You have these between rows of tenements, these back lanes. So there's houses here and houses here, and this horrible back lane here. They became sites for all this rubbish, but also it's the most popular place for burglars to get into a house through the back, particularly with a row of tenements, because there's no side. So you get in the back. So they installed these gates and gave the key to the owners of the houses. They reduced burglaries by about 40%. Simple strategy. 40%. This is in London. This is a haunt for drug dealers. These are drug dealers. And this is a photograph of a deal going down. So the simple strategy here was to install this uneven and sloping thing. Now, I don't know whether I should say this, but one of the reasons they did this is because they discovered these people, because they wanted to stay there, they used to urinate in the corner. And now, with that trickling down that way, it would go all over their feet. And this is on a more grander scale, showing how you can transform a rather frightening and dangerous railway station into something a little bit less frightening. It's probably worth me talking about this, because what most people then say, well, that's all very well, but all you're doing is moving crime from here to here. And so a colleague of mine, Kate Bowers at the Jill Dando Institute, did a meta-analysis. Do people know what a meta-analysis is? Okay. Did a meta-analysis of all situational crime prevention projects and looked at displacement. But they also looked at something else called diffusion of benefit. Do you know what we covered, diffusion of benefit? So displacement means that crime moves somewhere else or to another time. Displacement is that crime you didn't target or areas you didn't target also have reductions. And this is what they found. If we just look at the total here, they found that there was displacement. In about 26% of projects, crime moved to another location or another time. 26, so in other words, 74%, no displacement. But more importantly, in 27% of cases, crime went down in places where the project wasn't involved, so in nearby places. So I think we can answer that question just empirically. It's not a problem. It's not the problem people think it is. All right, I'm going to skip. So that's, I think, the most important things. There are two last things I want to talk about, and I'll do it very quickly, I promise. I want to talk about why this is important, because crime is changing, and I want to talk about why it's necessary for us to think even more broadly about other kinds of disciplines. But I'll probably skip some slides. So most of the theories that we look at in criminology were designed in the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, 50s, and they were really about volume, mass, street crime. But crime is changing. We were talking at the break about how so much crime now occurs in a cyber environment. And criminology is very poorly prepared for these changes. We require new analyses, new ways of thinking about it. So these are some things that really are crimes of the 21st century, or at least these are things we now look at that people never thought about. Cybercrime. Terrorism. We should be looking at terrorism. We should be looking at human trafficking. Commodity crime, like metal theft. Intellectual property crime, like software piracy. Wildlife poaching. Environmental crimes. Maritime piracy. Crime in non-Western settings. Traditionally, criminology has had nothing to say about these things. And my argument is, if we start thinking about, and I don't think criminology can really do very much in those. Metal theft, for example. Let's imagine our metal theft. Where is it? Yeah. The only way I think you can solve metal theft is to make metal more difficult to steal, or for it to be more easily traced through scrap metal agents. I don't think you're going to solve that by improving people's upbringing or increasing educational opportunities or whatever. It's a very targeted thing. And I think there are more and more of these examples where we need to think in entirely different ways about how we solve the problems. One of my areas of research is child pornography, and I think this is a great example of why we need to think differently. In 1980, before the internet occurred, child pornography was not an issue. There's a long quote here I won't read, but the main important thing is, this is from the FBI, The US Customs Service and the US Postal Service and the FBI do not consider child pornography a high priority, 1982. 6 months after that report went to the US government, the internet protocols were signed. And suddenly we had an explosion of child pornography on the internet because the environment changed, because suddenly, we didn't suddenly have many, many more pedophiles, but we had a platform where it was very easy to access child pornography. So our solution to child pornography is not to treat all of the people who are out there accessing it, it's to understand and make it more difficult for people to access these materials on the internet. It's an offence-targeted strategy. Our old strategies can't work. It's the only way. There are many, many more people accessing child pornography than you could ever arrest. You cannot arrest yourself out of this problem. You have to go back and make it difficult for this to happen, a new way of thinking. Which leads then, so the failure of usual approaches. That's kind of just what I've said. Whoops. It overwhelms police resources. So they estimate that there are 1 million men on the internet at any one time downloading child pornography, 1 million. And each year in the US, they arrest about 1,500. It's not a problem we can solve in the usual ways. That's my point. So what do we need? We need to focus on crimes. And we need to focus on stopping the crime rather than curing the offender. We need to reduce opportunities and perceived anonymity offered by the internet. And this is the segue into my very last points. We need a collaboration between social scientists and computer scientists. I'm a social scientist, I research in this area, but I need the input of computer scientists who know how the computer works, who know how the internet works. So, my final point, let's wrap up. I think we're at the point where we need to take multidisciplinarity really seriously. When criminologists talk about multidisciplinarity, they usually mean sociologists, lawyers, and psychologists. When I talk about multidisciplinarity, I'm talking about criminologists, sociologists, lawyers, psychologists, electrical engineers, computer scientists, geneticists, civil engineers, and so forth. So that's the Jill Dando model. That's the model, the institute that I come from is in an engineering faculty. We're not in a social science faculty. We're in engineering. We have about 12 full-time lecturers, academics, and they come from psychology, they come from criminology, they come from sociology, they come from mathematics, they come from genetics, they come from electronic engineering, they come from computer science. Have I missed any? And political science and geography. So in other words, we are trying to really widen what it means to be multidisciplinary. So when I tell people I'm in engineering and that I've got electrical engineers in my department, well, what can they do? Well, they do all sorts of really interesting projects. We've just done a major EU project looking at building buildings. It's odd even in English. Building buildings that withstand terrorist attacks. So we've had to have engineers and architects and social scientists involved in that. We've done some work with different people tracking vulnerable tiger populations. So we could do that as a pure geographic kind of problem, but some of the technology we need to do that, we've had to get our electrical engineers involved in. We've done some mathematical modelling of the London riots. We've got people looking at things like transfer of gunshot residue, transfer of semen in clothing and those kinds of traditional things. We've got people who are building equipment to detect drugs at borders. People who are using smartphones to report crime, building apps for that. Agent-based modelling we do, and so forth. So I'm serious about this. I think crime can involve all of these disciplines, chemistry and geography and economics and mathematics. All of these people have something to say about preventing crime. And let me come to the conclusion. So, what have I been talking about the last hour and a half?
Please, please.
Okay. I think as criminologists, if we just look at criminality, if we just... I've got fat fingers. I hate iPhones. If we just focus on criminality, then we're only looking at half the story. Criminology is about criminality and crime, and we need to look more at crime. Understanding why crime occurs provides a more nuanced, sophisticated understanding of offenders. And preventing crime should be the central goal of criminology. It amazes me when I talk to my colleagues in other departments that they have no interest in crime prevention. And I think, why on earth are you studying crime if you have no interest in preventing it? It would be like being a dentist but not being interested in taking out, filling teeth, or, they want to understand crime, but they don't want to do anything to stop it. It's crazy. Crime is changing, and we need to adapt to the changes. And by not engaging other disciplines, we're not really we're not making the most of what we can do. And what if I stop now? Well, I am, because look, that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Bueno, tenemos 20 minutitos para hacer un pequeño turno de preguntas. We can sit if you want. A ver, venga, preguntas, cuestiones.
Preguntas, ¿verdad?
Preguntas. Mayre.
Hi, nice to meet you. Bueno, voy a hacer la pregunta en español y así me ayudas a traducirle.
Okay.
Nada, para que lo pongas en situación, te le comento que estoy haciendo una investigación en prevención situacional de accidentes de tráfico a través del mapa del crimen. Y mi pregunta es sobre...
in situational crime prevention for the prevention of road crimes.
Okay.
Y mi pregunta sería que, ¿qué tipo de precipitador del crimen pueden influir en ciertos espacios como la seguridad vial para que personas buenas cometan delitos?
She's using your concept of precipitator of crime, and she's asking about what kind of crime precipitator can make that good people is a bad people in the car.
Okay. Well, I think the most obvious are the sorts of things that cause road rage.
Road rage?
Road rage? Yeah.
Rabia de la conducción.
So there's a little bit of research. It's not my field, but there was a study done by Harding and Inderbeer and some other people from Western Australia that looked at road rage as a function of road conditions and changes in road conditions and so forth. So those kinds of things that engender road rage. That would be the sort of thing I think I would look at.
And what do you think about anonymity? Anonymity, I think that there is something similar in the road and in the cyberspace. For example, with the Twitter use. The use of Twitter, there is people that can say incredible things that they will never say in the physical space and in a public space, but they say it in Twitter. And sometimes when you drive, it happens to me, you say some things that you will never say in a normal space. Maybe it's only because I don't believe that it's
the question, but how do you, I think your question would be directed at not only what would precipitate road deaths or road, but what can you do about it? So I agree, anonymity, if you're in a car, there's a buffer between you and the rest of the world, you feel anonymous and powerful. But what can you do to reduce? So tinted windows.
Sí, sí.
I think
lo que está diciendo es que sí, que puede ser que vaya por ahí, pero que lo interesante es entonces qué podemos hacer para evitar, es decir, y cómo podemos prevenir, cómo en definitiva poner el foco en la prevención.
Interesting to know whether cars with tinted windows it would be interesting to know whether cars with tinted windows
Yes.
have more violence.
Yes. He's asking if, bueno, está diciendo que sería interesante analizar si hay más crimen o más conducta violenta en los coches con las ventanas tintadas que en los coches con las ventanas normales. Also, maybe it's interesting to compare when you, because a very interesting thing is that that kind of behavior in the road, you do it more when you are in big roads than when you are in a village. Because in a village, maybe the one that you are doing that, maybe is someone who knows you.
Exactly.
I don't know, it's difficult to make that study, but it's interesting.
So could you ask what sort of things is she looking at that she thinks might...
Sí, la pregunta que te traslada a ti es, ¿qué es lo que estás buscando en última instancia?
Realmente saber si en determinados puntos donde se concentran accidentes.
Pero puntos, por tanto, geográficos, es decir, puntos calientes. She's asking more about hotspots, road hotspots pero para, digamos, no conductas criminales, sino para conducción temeraria, conducción...
Exactamente, porque en determinados puntos calientes, ¿qué es lo que incide que el ambiente haga que esas personas conduzcan con exceso de velocidad o ese tipo de comportamientos?
Y lugares o también horas
sí,
o...
Bueno, sí, en todo el conjunto, ¿no? El ambiente, o sea, ¿qué incide que hay?
What kind of situational factors can affect the way of driving and can make that in some places is more able to have that kind of crimes?
Well, so the short answer would be, if she's looking at precipitators particularly, then it would be things that make the driver either frustrated or anonymous would be the two most likely. So any kind of frustrations that occur, and the question is what can be done about that. So the timing of roadworks might be one thing. The timing of roadworks, or it seems to me in the UK, for example.
Sería analizar elementos que incrementen la frustración del sujeto, por ejemplo su agresividad y tal, y está, es decir, planteando algunos de ellos. I'm thinking about a very interesting study I saw in Spain about I don't know if I can say it right in English, but it's antisocial driving. The thing is, one very interesting thing is that the people drive bad when they see that the people are driving bad. If you see that social influence, but the thing is, if you see that someone is going to make something wrong, you do something wrong to... Yes, and maybe that is also an interesting way, and for the places, y sobre todo...
Creo que también hay alguna cosa cuando se cruza, por ejemplo, en sitios donde hay atascos, en las horas que tienen más prisa para llegar, encima hay una respuesta muy superior.
He was saying that, now he's saying that in places where there is, I don't know how is atascos in English.
Yeah, traffic jam.
Yeah. Traffic jam. And after the traffic jam, maybe, after that, es decir, después del atasco.
Depende, no, el lío del atasco pasa que no vas a cambiar la gente tiene más prisa.
Sí, and he's saying also, I think a very interesting thing is the time. It's not only the place, it's the time, the hour when happens. And Paco is saying about when the people is more ¿cómo se dice? Tiene prisa. It's more in a hurry. It's more in a hurry.
Yeah. Just finally, if you ask if she hasn't seen the paper by Endemir, I'd be happy to send it to her.
Okay.
So,
Okay, sí. Okay. So, one more questions.
Just one, maybe two. I remember when I read Ray Jeffrey book, Crime Prevention for Design, I was surprised because Ray Jeffrey showed the failure of the crime system, of justice and the criminal justice system, and because the system was expensive and the government spent a lot of money in programs. And can you explain us the difference between the assessment of programs of criminality and crime?
Okay.
This is very interesting. Only question. This is very interesting also because I remember in Brisbane, Farrington's conference showing the opposite. I'm not sure that he was showing the opposite. I think that when you do a presentation and when you show numbers, there is a infinite possibilities of showing the numbers, and you can show. But I think it's very interesting.
Okay. So I think that gets back to my point that I made. I'm not saying that it's not important to look at the offender.
Yes.
I spent the first half of my career looking at offenders.
Yes,
what I did.
Of course.
And so it's just that I think there are enough people doing that I don't have to do it anymore. So they're both important. If you look at the meta-analyses of the various programs, so rehabilitation programs, for example, generally find reductions in recidivism of between 10 and 20%, something like that. So that's worthwhile, I think. The real problem for me with those sort of rehabilitation programs is that they, by definition, occur after someone's committed a crime. So in my area of child sexual abuse, you wait around for someone to abuse a child and then you hope you give them treatment so they won't do it again. So my issue with rehabilitation and other criminal justice projects is that they're reactive. The whole point about situational prevention is sometimes one of the reasons it's difficult to measure it because you're measuring nothing. You're measuring something that didn't happen. So the very best situational crime prevention programs, no crime occurs.
Hago una traducción general porque no tener el apoyo de la presentación. Está preguntando a José Eugenio sobre, un poco el tema de medir los efectos respecto a ese tipo de programas basados más en la criminología ambiental, en la prevención situacional, frente a los programas tradicionales de la criminología basados básicamente en tratamiento de delincuentes, etcétera, etcétera, que son los que hay. Y yo le he comentado que, un magnífico criminólogo, David Farrington, comentaba un poco que, analizaba los beneficios de utilizar ese tipo de programas tradicionales de criminología. Lo primero es que en efecto no son contradictorias, ¿no? Es decir, no son incompatibles. Podemos realizar las dos partes de la criminología y tienen que ser. Más bien lo que pasa es que hay mucha gente ya realizando esa criminología y que es necesario que haya otro realizando otra cosa. Pero después hay que tener en cuenta que cuando se hacen estudios de esas características, incidiendo en, por ejemplo, reducir la tasa de reincidencia y, por tanto, ampliar la rehabilitación de los delincuentes, lo que estamos hablando es sobre criminales que ya han cometido el crimen. El crimen ya se ha producido. Entonces, la ventaja que tiene este tipo de programas es que podemos evitar que se produzcan crímenes. Nosotros también, pero podemos evitar crímenes que nunca ocurrirán. Pero además es el problema de la dificultad de medirlo. El problema es cómo mides algo que no ha pasado y que no pasará.
O sea, una reducción de algo que no...
Claro. The problem that how to measure what will never...
Exactly.
Yes.
Es minority report.
Sí, eso es lo que estamos en las cosas.
So there's more and more.
¿Puedes bajar el volumen de crimen de una fama? ¿Puedes bajar el reducir?
Sí, bueno, eso. You can reduce the volume of crime in a part of the city. The thing is always the excuse is going to be the displacement, but I think it's very important about the displacement that you said before. Is of course it's 24 there is displacement. It's 76 that no, and also is the function of benefits.
So here's the problem we have that follows directly from this. In virtually every Western country, even further than that, since 1994-95, the crime rates have dropped.
Yeah.
So they've dropped every year in Great Britain since 1993, and the US and so forth. And so the big question in criminology now is why has that occurred? And everyone has their own theories about why crime rates dropped. I think one persuasive theory is that it's getting harder and harder to commit crime.
Yeah.
So I don't think I could steal a car. If you told me go out and steal a car, I don't think I'd be capable of doing it because it's difficult.
Yeah.
Even shoplifting, I think there's a good chance I'd be caught with all the different strategies. So I think one of the persuasive reasons that crime has reduced is that
But I'm sorry, but we have official rate, and in that official rate we don't have cybercrime.
Right.
If we include cybercrime with the dark rate, with what the police and all the people know that happens in cyberspace, maybe we have a decrease in the physical space, but it's clearly increasing in the cyberspace.
Yeah. I'm not sure it takes up.
And the thing is, in the cyberspace, is more easier.
Yeah.
And is not getting harder.
Okay, I think you're right. I think cybercrime is one area we need to include in the figures. But I'm convinced that it's not a matter of displacement. I don't think that someone who used to beat someone up
No,
in the local pub thinks I'll become
No, I
Nigerian
was not saying
assassin.
that. It's true that organized crime is doing in some way. You have to look, for example, at money laundering. Money laundering in physical space not working now, and it's working money laundering only with the poker games. With the poker games, we are doing all the money laundering in the world. But I'm not saying that the criminals that are not committing crimes in physical space will commit crimes in cyberspace. What I'm saying is that in cyberspace is increasing crime because it's a new field of opportunity where, as the contrary as you said in the physical space, it's not getting harder.
Sure.
It's not getting harder.
Anyway, the point is, it's difficult to measure something that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
It's difficult to measure why crime is not
That's
occurring.
of course. More questions?
I'm trying to do it in English.
Like all of us.
Okay, I'm totally agree with the main goal of criminology have to be the prevention. Okay, in other hand, maybe for my knowledge in psychology, because I am a psychologist, I think that there are no evil persons or bad person and good persons. Yeah. No, hey.
It's
Just people.
The question comes from conversation. Is that about if there is bad?
No, just people that do bad things or good things. So, as talking with my colleague, criminology colleague, from other perspectives, people, some scientifics, think that there are evil persons. For example, psychopaths. Okay. How could we prevent, from your perspective, that evil evil person do wrong things. Okay.
Okay. So first of all, I agree there are actually some people who are bad and some who aren't. So it's like a normal curve, isn't it? Up this end we have Hitler, and down this end we have Teresa. Yes, you know, saints. Huh? And we're kind of in the middle. So we're not all the same. Some of us are more susceptible than others. So, for example, people with high impulsivity and so forth. So it's an interaction between people and the environment. So not everyone's the same. I say to people, if there's a car key left in a car, 20 people walk past before one person steals. So we have to accept that some people are much easier to take advantage of situations than others. But even at the end of the day, no matter how psychopathic you are, you cannot commit crime unless there's an opportunity. Even if you're a very bad and evil person and you carefully plan all of your crimes, we can at least slow you down, make it more difficult, make you commit less crimes than if you were otherwise. So that's the way I would see it. Some people are very, very determined and they're very, very hard to deter. But here's what I say. It's not a matter of 100% success versus 100% failure. That sometimes our solutions are 60% successful, but that's still worthwhile. So even if you're a professional burglar, professional burglars complain these days that it's much more difficult to steal. And they steal less and they steal more frequently. They still steal because they're professional burglars. It's the same with child pornography. There are some men who are so determined to download that, and they have, you know, very strong drives and maybe psychopathic. But even in those cases, we can make it harder and harder and harder for them. Won't be 100% successful, but be usefully successful.
I have a question for our expert on serial killers. I have a question. Also, Paco. Mi pregunta sería, bueno, la voy a hacer en inglés y después la traduzco. In serial killers, also there is an opportunity. And in the moment they, ¿cómo sería que los pillan? They caught? There is an opportunity, a matter of opportunity. Es decir, ¿cuándo pillan a Ted Bundy y por qué lo pillan?
Pues porque lo pillaron por un delito de tráfico.
Claro. Ted Bundy was in a road crime, no? The reason because they got Ted Bundy was a police man in a road. Son of Sam, you remember in New York, also because of a traffic traffic penalty. So the thing is, even in the cases that we think that is not a matter of opportunity, there is a matter of opportunity. The opportunity is there.
Just to add one more point to that, I talked mainly about prevention, but some of the research we do is also about catching people more quickly. So it's not prevention if we can. If we can't prevent, then how can police use some of this knowledge to identify offenders more quickly? And so I think that's a legitimate part of crime science.
It's also crime prevention for that kind of criminals.
So
for a serial killer, maybe catching them quickly is a way of crime prevention.
Sure.
Claro, pero evitando que pueda tener una interacción con cuanto más peligroso, más malo, que tenga la interacción persona-ambiente que no se ve. Es decir, tendríamos que violar incluso algún derecho fundamental.
Es lo más fácil siempre.
Can I give a simple example?
Yes.
So one of the things we know about really bad offenders is that they just don't do bad things. They're bad in a whole lot of ways. So So there was a study, Ken Pease came here.
Yeah.
So Ken Pease did a terrific study he might have talked to you about, where he was really irritated because Ken Pease, do you know Ken Pease?
Yeah.
So Ken is a very ethical and moral person. He was very, very irritated when people used disabled parking lots.
Yeah.
Did he tell you this story?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay, so he hated the fact that someone would come in and steal a disabled parking bay.
Aparcar en un sitio para discapacitados.
So his study was to take all the number plates of people who were in disabled parking bays and to run them through the criminal records checks. And he found something like 40-something% of those people had outstanding warrants, were wanted by police.
Sí, multas, sí.
So he that's now a technique the police use as a way of catching. It's a bit like what you were just saying, catching people for crimes, simpler crimes. Al Capone was caught for tax evasion.
But there was a relationship between having that warrant and parking the disabled place?
No,
there was a relation or not?
The only relation is that people who are psychopathic are psychopathic across the board.
Yeah.
They just don't do bad things. They do lots of little irritating things as well. And so if you use that kind of principle, you can use that to catch people in more efficiently. In the same way Al Capone was arrested for, and serial killers get arrested for traffic offences. One of the most famous criminals in Australia ended up, they couldn't pin things on him. They thought he was guilty of 10 or 15 murders, and finally he killed someone in a road rage.
Yeah. Sí, no, lo que está diciendo, un poco lo habéis entendido, pero vamos, que en todo caso que los más malos de todos, los más malos, los tíos malos, no hacen malas cosas todo el tiempo, no están haciendo las cosas más brutales todo el tiempo, pero sí están haciendo cosas pequeñas malas todo el tiempo, con lo cual a veces es más fácil pillarles con las cosas pequeñas malas que con el asesinato tal, y que de hecho que nos muestra ejemplos de gente que es pillada por un delito menor cuando comete el delito mayor, que decía de un tío en Australia, como la de Capone, decía de un tío en Australia que se suponía que tenía 20 asesinatos y le pillaron por que había matado a un tío por un tema de ira en la carretera, una discusión de carretera. Okay, more questions?
I have one.
I have two, so...
Okay. In USA and UK and Australia, you can publish your maps.
Yeah,
Friend maps.
interesting.
How have you solved the privacy question, the problem of the privacy?
Not only the problem of privacy. So, if I can expand the question, the thing is, we here, Crímina, we want to make some kind of project that we are doing in Giordano in Spain and publish the maps of the city of Elche when the crime happens. But the first thing is that the politicians say, I don't want that all the people know when crime happens, where crime occurs. We say that it's a problem of privacy, but I think it's not only a problem. It's a problem of privacy, but also is a problem of public information. Yes, we show that the map of London when you can know where to buy, when you are going to buy a house, in which part there is more or less.
So this is you're talking about the publicly available maps in the UK.
Yes.
Police UK.
Yeah.
How you solve?
Well, we didn't solve it. The government decided.
Okay.
The government decided they wanted. So that was driven by the government, who were.
Who was?
It was the Conservative government.
Conservative.
They wanted open. They thought just for their particular ideological reasons that the public had a right to know. But the issue has been at what point it gets aggregated. Okay,
son datos agregados.
level of aggregate. So it's fairly highly aggregated. It's aggregated to street sections.
Yeah, but not now.
It's,
I think you can see.
well, I don't know.
No, Inglaterra ponía todo Incluido lo que habían puesto juicio.
No, maybe you cannot see the name, but you can see the crime.
Y eran menores, además.
Yes.
There are a couple of restrictions as far as I know. There are some crimes, sexual crimes, I don't think occur, and also it's still not it's not down to address level. It's aggregated to some higher level. There's debate about this, but not very much. There was some concern that people would look and it would devalue houses, but it was driven by the government, and actually the government is an ally of ours because they are introducing, if not laws, certainly a climate where government departments are being more than encouraged to share data with academics. So 5 years ago where you would go and ask for data and you would simply get, no, we're not going to give it to you. The philosophy of this government, for whatever reason, has been that the public has a right to know, and they've driven this agenda of greater access to data. So the politicians control this, and they're the ones that have to make the change.
What do you think?
I think it's excellent. One of the greatest problems we've had is to get good quality data. Now, one of the solutions that we've adopted, but it's been very expensive, is to build a secure data lab at UCL. So we have a data lab now that's being accredited by police and by the health department and so forth that will hold data to the same specifications as the government will hold it.
The same structure for the
police? Yes. So this lab, it cost us £1 million to build, but it has certification that it can hold secure data. So that's made it much easier for us to get good quality, non-anonymized the data from government. But on top of that, in the last 4 years, the political climate has changed to making this. So, for example, another big project that we're involved in, where the government is trying to encourage access to all of the data sets that the education department, the health department, so forth, hold, make those available to researchers. So, yeah, it's very encouraging from us.
Spain is impossible.
It's a dream for us.
Yeah.
And,
No, mostly a layman.
yes, more a layman than a dream. Yeah. Okay, we have another question made the last. We have a very big relationship with Ibero-America, you know, in Spain, and a very interesting thing that happens to us is that when you talk about our criminology, they are very interested on, but they still very interested on a different perspective of the criminology. Not only the classic perspective of criminality, but specifically the classic perspective of critical criminology and all that is with this perspective of criminology. I understand that. They have a very big problem, very big social problem, and maybe they are going to think in the other part when they solve the social problem. There is a lot of countries that now are beginning to be interested in that new criminology. For example, the first one is Chile. But it's true that Chile is not in the same, we can say, in the same kind of, have not the same kind of problems that having, for example, Central America. In the center of America, in Guatemala, in Honduras. But the thing is, also in the places where they have very big social problems, and they have very big conflict, political, ideological conflicts. Also, our perspective, crime perspective, what can show today, and what kind of problems can solve? Because I think there are a lot.
It's a really question. I think one of the areas that we have not done very well in our field, environmental criminology, is to go outside of traditional Western, even outside of urban areas. So much of what we write about is about urban crime. So there's beginning to be some research looking at what you might call resource limited and also in non-urban environments. I still think that situational prevention has a huge amount to offer. In fact, sometimes it's in environments where the infrastructure and where the infrastructure is very poor and the social disorganisation is high, that it's actually doubly hard to run social programs, whereas very simple situational programs might be successful. So to give an example, I'm currently working on a project in Australia in remote Aboriginal communities. Now these, shamefully, are third world communities in a first world country. When you go there, they're extraordinarily deprived and extremely high crime rates and extremely high child sexual abuse rates. They're very remote, maybe 400 kilometres along a dirt road in the centre of Australia, 1,000 people living together in shacks and really high crime rates. But even there, we think the most productive thing to do is to look at the opportunities that exist for crime. Certainly they need social development.
Yeah, of course.
But they need that not to reduce crime, they need social development because they deserve social development. I still think even in those environments we can look at where the sexual, for example, one of the things we're discovering in this community is that the school is very unsafe. There are lots of hiding places where sexual assaults occur when children go to the toilets, they're jumped on by other children and so forth. And one simple thing we can do is redesign that environment in a way that makes it a haven. So again, I don't want to come across as being dogmatic and saying there's only one solution. There are many solutions. So happens I like this solution, but I would never ever say that those other things are not worthwhile.
Okay, so I think is the time. If there are more questions.
They're questioned out.
So thank you, Professor Richard Wortley, for coming to our young center, research center, and thank you for coming to our university and give us all your experience. And I hope that is a good thing for us for working in your ideas and for continuing to developing our center that is like a little son of you. So thank you for coming and thank you for your...
Well, thanks for the invitation, and I'm just again sorry that I have to speak in English.
Thank you.